Good evening from New York, and welcome again to CWS Journeys. Thank you for joining us, and those of you who are joining us for the first time, a very special thank you. My guest this evening hails from South Africa, and I want to say a very special thank you to her for making such an enormous sacrifice to stay up so late. South Africa, as most of you will know, is 6 hours ahead of us. So I am going to, her name is Kwanele Asante. I'm going to bring her on and let's just start the show. Kwanele, good evening and welcome to CWS Journeys.
Good evening, Selwyn, and good evening to our listeners or people joining us today. Thank you for having me.
You're quite welcome, Kwanele. And as I was telling my audience just now, a very special thank you. We're really grateful that you are making such a sacrifice to stay up and spend this time with us. Kwanele,
Oh,
I want to start by asking you, beyond the accomplishments and the awards and the honoraries and the honors and so on, who is Kwanele Asante?
Kwanele Asante is an African woman, a mother, a lawyer, a friend, um, many things. Just a simple, ordinary African woman who's done amazing, interesting things.
Interesting. I want to jump into this and ask you if you were so determined as a child, or did this determination develop later on in life?
You know, funny that you'd ask me. Somebody was talking to me earlier today, and I told them how my mother used to punish me for talking too much and always being the one that agitated on behalf of my brother. So I guess what has happened is just a journey of who I was from the beginning, really.
If you were not a lawyer and a health equity advocate, what do you think you would be doing today?
I would be I had hoped to be a career diplomat. Uh, I wanted to work at the International Court of Justice. It would still be law, but based in The Hague in the Netherlands. That was my aspiration from when I was about 20.
And you spoke about your mother when you were a child. I want like you to give us a glimpse into your life when you were 9 and 15 years old.
Wow, so when, then I have to do quick math and remember how old. Oh, 9. 9, I would have been uh, an ordinary South African kid who was blessed with a beautiful grandfather, my mother's uncle. I always, like in hindsight, think he was my first community leadership teacher. He used to live in a village, and he would come and fetch me and my siblings around the June holidays, and he would take me around to his tribal gatherings. Looking back, that was so unusual
Mhm.
because I was, or still is, a girl child. You know, people have this notion of Africa as excluding girl children from spheres of influence. And here was my grandpa taking me around. 16, caught up in Boy George, Wham, whatever was the music at the time, wearing mismatched clothing and just being outright rebellious. That would have been me at 15.
Your favorite memory of your parents as a child?
My favorite memory of my mother as a child is coming home when it's rained. That beautiful smell of the African soil. And the special treat would be to get a warm bath and get hot chocolate and snuggle in her bed. Unfortunately, my father was not a part of my life from the time I was 4, so I don't have memories of him except what has been told to me by other people.
One of the things that Africa has given many of us through films and through books is the essence of African wisdom. There are African proverbs. There's always some elder person giving us some words of wisdom. Can you remember any words of wisdom that you would have gotten from your mom that have helped to shape who you are today as a woman?
They were very controversial. She famously told me, I'm going to give you a husband who will never leave you, and his name is education.
I like that, Kwanele. I'm going to come back. I like that. And you know,
And he's never left me, hey? He
that's
keeps
true.
on giving. Wonderful husband. What's
Reading up on you, I realize you spend a lot of time around women, and what are some experiences you draw on when speaking to a group of women who might be seeking advice and encouragement from you?
um, I tend to observe initially and see what's happening.
Hmm.
Whatever message I would impart is largely very often driven by the women I am with, because taking in who they are, the nuances, I'm just always struck by their sense of dignity. So I would invoke that and acknowledge whatever good quality they have and ask them to just carry on and, relying on that makes them tick.
What are some people surprised to learn about you when they get to know you, Cornelia?
A lot of people see the loud, outspoken African woman. If people got to know me, they would be surprised to know that I love trees. It's just something very majestical and very quiet and very calming in trees. I love trees.
You know, and we always believe, or we believe that out of nature comes many medicines. And talking about medicine, I want to just peel back the layer a little bit and talk about your fight with cancer. At age 37, I believe you were diagnosed with cancer. Um, After graduating, I guess 2 years after graduating with your law degree, what was that like for you at the time when you got the news?
It was a very, very unreal situation. I had just turned 37, 3 weeks after my 37th birthday. I had studied law as a 30-something-year-old woman to reinvent myself after working in corporate communications. And to go into that doctor's room on the 25th of April, I always just remember the date, and be told those three words: you have cancer. It's a out of body experience. I think the biggest word would be disbelief, just utter disbelief. Like, no, he's not talking to me.
And then the subsequent chemotherapy um, caused severe heart muscle damage to you. How did you deal with that situation?
That's, unfortunately sent me, or fortunately, because that is the nature of being diagnosed with life-threatening diseases, sent me into a very deep depression,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of anger at the injustice of how can I first get sick 2 years after completing my internship, then 6 months later be diagnosed with something else on top of the cancer. Just for me, there was just a very strong sense of this is unfair.
Mm-hmm.
This is unfair. Why me?
And Corneli, and I will explore the different um, stations or parts of your life along your journey. But when you reflect today, with all that you have accomplished in terms of bringing attention to the plight of poor people not having access to the same kind of health care as the rich and so on. When you look back upon the arc of your journey and what you have accomplished, what do you say to Corneli who forced her that she was diagnosed? Do you still feel that it was unfair to you? How do you look at it now?
I still feel hard done by because I never made it to The Hague, and all other dreams that I had, a diagnosis killed
Yes.
dreams. I think that's what people don't realize. the many losses of cancer. But looking at where I am now with my work, I say to the girl Kwanele or the woman Kwanele, congratulations.
Congratulations.
You've done very well. I'm proud of you.
A scenario, Kwanele, here you are in the presence of some young women or women who have been diagnosed with breast cancer and who are among the population who do not have the kind of access that you have. But some of them, of course, perhaps are despair and you know, a sense of feeling a sense of lost hope. What do you say to them?
I acknowledge, having been diagnosed as a young woman myself, I acknowledge their sense of grief because at 37, you are in your 30s. It's very unusual to have to confront your mortality. So I acknowledge that loss of hope, of dreams, of things. And also, acknowledge the fear, the immense fear of, oh Lord, I am going to die. Often these women have not had children or have not had the chance to be married. And much as we're in the 21st century, a lot of women's first initial reaction, the young women, tends to be, who's going to love me? Who's going to marry me? And these are complex questions.
And then there, of course, there are that population who are mothers. You're a mother yourself. What is that dialogue like? Because I imagine cancer impacts negatively sometimes the family life or the family structure. What is that conversation like?
Yeah, that one is very difficult. I actually had to swallow a little bit hard because being a mother with cancer, I think for me was the hardest part of my journey. To see your young children looking at you with fear and confusion, not knowing, you can't tell them too much, and yet you can't withhold the truth from them. And unfortunately, the mothers that I work with are mostly single mothers. And to have that conversation where they don't have often adequate support structures to help them break the news to the children and help them cope. So for me, it's that mother to mother. And again, and I will keep repeating it, just acknowledging the lived challenges and the lived experience and the complexity of where they are at.
There are people who obviously are able to draw from you and your experience. Who did you draw from to navigate your own challenges with your own family?
I draw, I know that some of your listeners or people joining us in this conversation would have seen the quote advertising our chat. I drew immense support from my mentor, Justice Edwin Cameron, who himself was diagnosed with a life-threatening disease at 37. He's the only South African public official who is living openly with his HIV status. So Edwin knew what it was like to have your career threatened when you've worked very hard and you're starting to climb. So he could talk to me about that experience, which was very special because a lot of people didn't quite understand what I was faced with at that time.
And how important is that to have someone that can relate to what you're going through and can encourage you or give you a sense of hope? How important is that for a patient?
For me, and people differ because a lot of people want positive news to help them cope with a difficult situation. I'm the opposite. I want somebody that I can talk to very honestly and acknowledge the mess that I am in. And Edwin was that person for me. Whereas, everybody around me was railing to pep my spirits up. Edwin could sit with the loneliness and the fear and the isolation and the sheer enormity of facing death at 37 and just being able to sit there and be heard and to cry and to be vulnerable. Um, yeah, he was very helpful to me.
So he allowed you to indulge your vulnerability. And
That's
as you mentioned, Edwin, I want to get into the whole um, access to cancer treatment and what sort of build sort of echoes um, your fight actually in bringing awareness to this situation, the equity of health treatment. I want to read some words that you shared with me. Amidst the poverty of Africa, I stand before you because I am able to purchase health and vigor. I am here because I can pay for life itself. The very Edward Cameron. When you hear those words, when you first saw them, what happened to you? How did they resonate with
they spoke very deeply to me. And the strange thing is, I first read those words in 2004 in Edwin's first autobiography. And I was reading the book as a friend. And when I read those words, they really touched me deeply. Little did I know that about 2 years later, those words would become my words. So I'm just intrigued at how life sometimes pans out.
you? Yeah.
And they speak very deeply to me, the notion of being able to buy life itself. It brings me into the crux of my work because I don't believe that whether that people uh, should be prevented from a chance at life. People facing terminal illnesses should be denied a chance of life because they are poor. I struggle with the notion of having to buy life itself.
Hmm. Are women, do a lot of women support you and support your efforts?
I think initially a lot of women did not understand what it is that I do.
Mm-hmm.
Because the nature of my work is very different at grassroots level versus at advocacy, like sitting with you here or at high level meetings. With the women on the ground, it's more day to day. I will get involved with actual access to treatment issues if I know a particular woman that I'm following and whose family I'm part of. And those women who see me call their doctor with their permission to ask questions, those women are very supportive and very grateful. Selwyn and everybody, one of the greatest gifts that I've received in my life is access to the so-called poor people. I'm always humbled by how generous they are and how encouraging and how kind they are. I've just received enormous love from the communities that I serve.
I understand that this particular access or one of these access, you were exposed or you learned Isi Zulu. Am I pronouncing this correctly, Kwanele?
That's correct. That's correct,
Isi
yes.
Zulu, and which give you a deeper access to the particular community. Tell us a little bit about that and how it helped you in your effort to fight for these very people.
South Africa has 11 official languages, and isiZulu is the lingua franca, if you will, of Black South Africa. I am a Motswana, and my native language and isiZulu are not in the same family of languages. So ordinarily, the Sotho-speaking people, which is the group that I come from, would not speak isiZulu unless they've lived in a metropolis. So when I first went in to Soweto, which is the largest South African township of the 1976 school riots. Most people know it in that context. I would see on the faces that the women were saying something, and my translator would not have the same emotion and intensity and desperation. And I decided that, to serve better, I would have to learn isiZulu. So I asked the community, in the spirit of mutual help, will you please help me to speak isiZulu, even if I break it, laugh, correct. And it's been an invaluable decision, just the ability to speak, but more so when we get to the emotion, the pain, the fear, the desperation. I just find that it's very powerful to be able to hold somebody in their home language. But likewise, equally important it is when they give me their narrative in mother tongue, that I get the details of their disease, that I'm able to translate in a more robust way to the doctors and help get better treatment access instead of getting information via another source.
Is that a considerable issue? The relationship, the language, or the communication between doctors and patients from certain areas that speak different languages. Is that usually a problem?
Unfortunately, it is. Most of South African cancer specialists are white males. They tend to be over 50. And when we go back into our history, where white male and we're in power, and the whole notion of apartheid, we are a transforming society, but it's going to take time before everybody feels absolutely equal. So most of these doctors, unfortunately, do not speak native languages or indigenous languages, even if they've been in a community for 30 years, because people tend to want to speak to the doctor in the doctor's language. And that makes for a very, in my opinion, unsatisfying medical clinical setting.
Law. Who or what inspired you to pursue a degree in law?
My mom again, when I was a child, I said earlier that I wanted to be a diplomat. For some reason, I've always had a fascination with law but it crystallized really at about age 10 when my mom started calling me Museneke, which is the last name of one of our famous advocates who's now the Deputy Constitutional Court Justice. So every time I would open my mouth, my mom would say, "Oh, there goes Museneke again." And when I'm called, she'd say, "What does Museneke think?" And then eventually I had to ask, who is this Museneke? You tend to reference him a lot in relation to me. And so when she explained that, he is this African, who, by the way, was the youngest South African political prisoner to serve on Robben Island. He went there at age 14. And it's amazing that today he's the Deputy Chief Justice. And I had the pleasure at 18 of running into him before I went to law school and saying, my nickname at home is Museneke. So conversations with him and Edwin made me become the passionate lawyer that I am.
You mentioned your mom, Kwanele, and you spend a lot of time among women. You fight for women as well. Who are some women in your life, in your community, that you looked up to when you were a child, and perhaps have helped to shape who you are today?
If I'm honest, it would just be my mom.
Your mom.
I have 6 brothers, so I have always been surrounded more by men than women. So it would have been my mom.
Mhm.
Yeah.
This happens to be August if I'm correct, Women's Month in South Africa.
It is. It is. We are 4 days now. 5 days.
Yes, 5 days. And so, how are you celebrating? Or how do you plan to celebrate?
Well, to start with, I'm sitting up at 2 a.m. South African time talking to an international audience. Um,
I like that.
uh, and then on Friday, I'll go to a town 2 hours away from home
Yes.
to go give my maiden speech as a budding academic. And then on Sunday, I will go to the official Women's Day celebration where the president will be the guest of honor. But most of it really will be spent with my books to try finish my MSc studies, Masters of Science studies, because I decided that August should be the month that I really advance myself as a woman on a personal level.
Mm-hmm. So, you're studying, I understand, bioethics and health law. Why?
That's correct.
Why, Kwanele? Why those two areas?
Uh, because they speak to the issues of health disparities that I care so much about. And at the moment, bioethics is a relatively young discipline, and it is very new to the African context. But I feel very strongly about, issues around the patient's voice in the clinical setting. We spoke earlier about the disparities around language and who the doctors are, and people not being understood for who they are. African patients needing to come into a clinical setting that's Western within an African cultural paradigm. I just think that's out of sync. So I decided that I will specialize in these two areas so that I can bring mostly the African patient's voice and also help to drive the dialogue in medicine to start incorporating the sociocultural context and start acknowledging the fact that we are in Africa, but of course the issues of equity and respect for African people and their bodies and their health needs are, I could go on and on and on and on.
I'm listening to you, and I'm sure our audience is picking up the same thing that I'm picking up. Someone who is articulate or eloquent and who's passionate and determined in whatever she's doing. And my concern is that in all my questions tonight, I might not get a chance to really bring out what exactly Kwanele Asante does, which is very important, very, very important that everybody understands quite clearly what is it she does. So if you could tell us in a sentence, if you can tell us in a few sentences, what is it exactly that Kwanele does for people who are, what is it you do? Let me not define it.
Okay, yeah, and I'm glad you stopped there. What is it that I do is not at an individual level anymore. That's changed 2 years ago. What is it that I do now is advocate for poor patients to have the medicines that they need to have a go at their cancer. So I will go into a policy meeting or an academic meeting and bring to the table the issues of lack of medicines, and because of issues of costs and other issues, but mostly around costs and lack of access. So in a nutshell, she speaks a lot to try and ensure that people get the medicines that they need to have the chance to fight their cancer, as she did.
Let's go back a little bit in time to this non-profit organization you founded called Breast Sense. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly again. Breast Sense. What was the purpose of Breast Sense, and what inspired it?
Presence was inspired by the lack of a clear Black voice talking about the lived experience of breast cancer. When I was diagnosed, I went on treatment and I was in treatment for about 8 months before I saw another Black person, Black woman, who was living openly with her cancer. So out of this personal experience of loneliness and confusion, wondering, am I the only Black person? I know that I tend to be loud and unique, but really I couldn't be the first Black woman to have this. So I created that. Also looking at the prevailing environment, I noticed that there were no campaigns that were messaging primarily to the needs of Black women and acknowledging our bodies. When you look at the pink narrative of breast cancer, very rarely will you see a Black woman in it. And I decided that I would change that. But unlike other NGOs, I decided that Breast Sense would not be about just creating awareness. It would be about articulating the treatment access and the medical rights of Black women. Teaching them to be informed health consumers in terms of giving informed consent, and also teaching them about the clinical aspects of the disease. For instance, if I give an example, as a woman with hormone receptor positive breast cancer, I had to go on a 5-year treatment, hormone treatment, to repress my menstrual cycle. For an African woman with the same type of breast cancer, this poses potentially very difficult questions because she won't be able to conceive. And there are huge cultural expectations that a daughter-in-law will produce offspring for her husband, her family-in-law. So helping them understand why they cannot fall pregnant in the 5 years and helping their families-in-law and husbands understand the clinical reasons. That's the kind of messaging we give. And it's amazing that people are supportive of their own when they understand the clinical instead of just being aware of lumps and ribbons and all those traditional aspects of breast cancer in October.
One last question, then a quick break. Here you are in this virgin territory of messaging, speaking out on an issue that has never been spoken out on before. In a post-apartheid era, what was that like for you, Kwanele? Were there concerns out of fear? How did you go about doing this? How did you overcome any fears you might have had?
Unfortunately, when I started, my work got misunderstood as racializing breast cancer or politicizing breast cancer, because I was comparing and contrasting white women, and myself included. I'm not white by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm one of the few privileged people of color who have access to private care, contrasting to the majority of Black women who do not have access to private care. So I was talking to that, and people were unhappy that, people would say, cancer is cancer regardless of race. And I would say, I differ fundamentally because race plays a very important role in the allocation of health resources. So it hasn't been an easy journey to where we are today. But we're making headway. We've made great headway.
Thank you. Let's take a quick break.